Alright, so we got Remembrance Day, or I guess in the US it's also called Veterans Day, I believe, but I wanted to make a video about what kind of bothers me about it. Now, for starters, nothing about the whole remembering and the sacrifices and all that the veterans made is what I want to talk about because if anything, and I would say not only if anything, I don't think the veterans that fought in these wars, World War One, World War Two, you name it, I definitely don't think they get the credit that they deserve. But getting into it, what bothers me about it is that number one, we kind of forget about it. I mean, most people even on the day don't really do anything. And now, I don't think that that's the big issue. I think the whole, being super patriotic or about it or any of that kind of stuff isn't really the point in my mind, at least in my opinion. I think the biggest problem that we see nowadays is that what was fought for was freedom, freedom of speech, all this kind of stuff, and yet nowadays people are dumping it down the drain basically. People nowadays tend to not care about freedom of speech, they tend to not care about all this kind of stuff that people fought for. Now, if they wouldn't have fought for it, we very well could be living, under a fascist or communist rule nowadays, and free speech wouldn't exist. The freedoms that we have wouldn't exist. And nowadays, although people do tend to make whenever people complain about how things are nowadays, you always hear that we have it so good argument. Now, I think we have it. The we have it so good argument is good in some ways and not good in other ways. The good part of it that I think is the part that I think people take advantage of a lot, that nowadays you have all these, I mean, it's a you can tell that there's a big culture gap because it seems like the younger people are, the less they care about this kind of stuff. And it's probably for the simple reason that the younger you are, the less likely you are to, I mean, obviously you didn't do it yourself, but know someone who did it themselves and know what it took to do this kind of, or to fight for this kind of stuff. And like I said, it's something, and at least this is, I mean, purely just my opinion, but the part that bothers me the most is that people nowadays don't value the stuff that was fought for. And I think that going to a Remembrance Day ceremony or Veterans Day ceremony, whatever you want to call it, to me, in my mind, that's not the most important part. The important part is whenever someone wants to impose some law or rules, banning or reducing free speech or something along those lines, or reducing just any sort of freedom in general that we have nowadays, that people nowadays don't really care. And not only that, you have a lot of people that support this kind of stuff. And in my mind, that this is the exact stuff that was fought to never happen. I mean, the U.S. The United States, you have the First Amendment, but it's being attacked all the time. I mean, if the Democrats had their way, there'd be even more. There may not even be free speech. There's no longer free speech in almost every other first world. I mean, in every other country in the world, basically. You have countries like Canada that technically have free speech in the Constitution, but it's not held up by the courts. You have, I mean, the whole forcing people to use gender pronouns is even though I think that people should use pronouns or preferred pronouns, forcing people to do it is anti-free speech by definition, no questions asked. Just because you agree with it doesn't mean that people on the left seem to think that because they agree with it that it must be okay. But that's kind of what I wanted to make as far as this goes, is that what bothers me about Remembrance Day or Veterans Day is that, number one, the veterans, I mean, the other big part of it too is the fact that it was overwhelmingly men that did, I mean, it was like 99% men, 99.9, and that you have people that completely take advantage of that aspect of it too, that if it was, 99.9% women, I'm sure we'd be reminded about it on a daily basis, pretty much. But the fact that it was men is completely forgotten. So that's kind of my two takeaways, I guess, from this video is that number one, we completely take advantage of it. Not only that, a lot of people nowadays, you have these, leftist millennials and Gen X people that, advocating against free speech, and then we completely ignore the fact that it was overwhelmingly men, in that masculinity wasn't so toxic after all, I guess. So that's kind of all I wanted to get at, is that what I believe should be talked about more when it comes to this kind of stuff is the freedoms that they fought for need to be upheld, because a lot of them are they're going away. They no longer exist even in a lot of the countries that they were fought for. Number two, this was overwhelmingly men that made this sacrifice. So let's stop pretending that men are so bad in society in the past and nowadays. So basically that's my take home point as far as this video goes. So if you liked it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.